everyone, welcome to another Broken Meeple Accessorize video. I had to change my rotor for what videos I was going to bring out recently because, well, sadly my microphone developed a bit of a fault. Two videos got recorded with audio that you could barely hear unless you were a dog, and so I've had to kind of like, I need to get some other videos out, otherwise you're without content, and I just wouldn't feel good about that, even though I'd be a bit less stressed. But I'm basically going to do an accessorize video here talking about some game mats from a store called Lizard Den. So just to sort of show you on my iPad here, Lizard Den store makes a bunch of custom game mats for various board and card games, and it's done by a bloke called Jacob Ziemba, and I hope I pronounced that right. I had to even Google the pronunciation of that one. But we've got Wingspan, Aeon's End, Marvel Champions, Roombound, Everdell, Seven Wonders Duel, Multiple Wingspan, Arkham Horror LCG, Lord of the Rings LCG, Mansions of Madness, Journeys in Middle-earth. They can even do your own dice tray. And, there's a lot of really good stuff on this site. And basically, Jacob has very kindly sent me a bunch of mats for a bunch of games that I play to basically give my thoughts on the mats themselves. Do they work well? Could they be better? What would I change? Should they be bigger, smaller? And just to give my viewpoints as to how I've got on with them. So that's essentially what I'm going to do. I'm just going to go through all the mats in turn and give my sort of overview as to how they work and what I think of them. Have they been good for games? Have they been okay? Are they just a substitute? Or, would I never play without them? Certainly there are none of these mats that I would never use. I like using Playmats, but some would be obviously better than others. Now, before I get on to Playmats, it should also be known you can do little dice trays. So they've done the Broken Meeple there. My logo with the blue background apparently works very well as a dice tray. So this now gets used in a few solo modes and a few plays with friends. But let's talk about Marvel Champions first. So this is a giant mat that can be used with Marvel Champions. They do a smaller one, I believe, but after playing with this one, I don't know why I would get the smaller one, because this one pretty much does exactly what I want to do for a game. So I'm going to get some pieces out and show you just kind of how they work. Let's just get I need a deck. Can I get a deck? Now let's just get a bunch of cards. So here we go. Let's pull out Iron Man from this game. So down here, you've got basically all of these cards are slots for what you can do. So you've got upgrades, you've got room for over 7 upgrades, 5 supports, 4 allies, hero, your deck, and some status effects. Now, the status effects are literally just put the little card on top of it. So those tiny little cards that you had for stunned, confused, and tough, you literally just put one there when you're like that. Okay, that's cool. It's a placeholder for them. But the thing I like about this is not only the fact that there's a lot of slots, and in Marvel Champions, you can have a lot of things out. You can have a lot of upgrades, a lot of supports, and a fair few allies. This seems to cater for, as far as I'm aware, I don't think I've had a single game where I've had more cards than the slots on this mat. I've come close to having 5 allies, but that was a niche scenario, I think. Most of my decks, in fact, all my decks, I don't think I've ever had to need more than 7 upgrades, 5 supports, and the like by the time we go through. But the way it works is that you place the card on these various slots. So let's get a few upgrades there. So Iron Man's boots, his powered gauntlets, just using his cards to kind of showcase. So he's got a lot of upgrades. All right, let's get a few supports. So we've got Pepper Potts, Supersonic Punch. Nope, that's an event. That is not a support. We got any more? We got an ally. So we got War Machine there, and we'll put maybe another upgrade. And that's all that. Yeah, he doesn't have much in the way of support. Just has a ton of various things. But okay, and then let's say you've got a deck. So I'll put the rest of his cards there. Like I said, I'm just showing with a few cards just to get the hang of it. And the idea is that, as you can see, we cover up the space so that the word ready is above each slot. And so basically, anytime you need to exhaust a card, you simply just slide the card up a little bit, and it shows as exhausted. So no longer do you have to do the whole 90-degree tap thing, which, adds more space that you need on the table. This is probably my favorite bit about a lot of Lizard Den's mats. The fact that quite a few of them use this kind of ready and exhausted mechanic, and it's just so much easier than having to go twist, 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 especially as when it comes to this game, there's a lot of things that exhaust. In fact, just going through Iron Man cards here already, let's say, exhaust the helmet, exhaust gauntlets, exhaust Stark Tower, exhaust rocket boots, exhaust Pepper Potts. Literally, the only thing that isn't exhausting here is basically Tony Stark. But, Iron Man has to eventually come out and start hitting stuff, so, okay, here we go. So he exhausts to fort for 2, Stark Tower exhausts, exhaust, 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 and by the end of the round you can see what you've used clearly and what you haven't, and then once you need to ready everything, just slide it back down. And that's essentially what the mat does. It just is a very nice way of revealing what is ready, what is exhausted. Discard deck, easy enough. Those, more allies, pretty sweet overall. The one choice that I'm a little bit hazed about is what exactly is the backdrop on this mat supposed to be? It's not anything that I've recognised from any Marvel system anyway. It's got a character here who I don't recognise. Somebody might have to fill me in on who this character is meant to be, but then it's got like a massive building, fire everywhere, like a big invasion's happening, so it certainly looks pretty impressive in the sense of, wow, this is quite intense shot, shall we say, epic, but yeah, it doesn't necessarily look Marvel related. Maybe I'm just not particularly fine-tuned with my Marvel comic lore, because he's got a gauntlet there, like a golden glove thing, but this doesn't look anything like Thanos, so I wouldn't call it that. What's that spaceship up there? Not entirely sure where the picture is from, but that aside, it's just a very solid mat. I enjoy using this one. Obviously, there is nothing on here for the villain. The villain deck you need to have separate, and your engaged enemies will just have to be above the mat, but because you don't need anything under the mat, I could pretty much have this right next to me on my table, and then the villain's above it, and no problem. So, personally, I mean, the small mat is not bad, but I would find with the small mat, you probably would run out of slots, particularly for upgrades and supports. This is nothing too big, but it clearly does everything that I need it to do. I'm not overflowing off it, and it's a simplistic thing to use. And if you want to put your hit point counter somewhere, you could just put it like in this area here where there's a fair bit of space, and you're pretty much sorted. So, yep, overall, really enjoy the Marvel Champions mat. This is the large one. Now this mat is used with the Lord of the Rings LCG, and I will be using Marvel Champions cards to illustrate this because frankly the card setup is pretty much identical to Marvel Champions in that you have heroes, allies and attachments instead of upgrades. It's basically the same format, so really just suspend your disbelief a little bit, okay? But this is a smaller mat, so this is more comparable to the fairly smaller size. Your hero, again, would be in a space like this, and like I say, just go with it. And trying to find, most of these are events, so let's pull out Iron Man again and borrow him for a second because I feel he'll work better. So your ally can go here. Let's use upgrades as attachments and just sort of go with that really. And then you've got let's say maybe I can find Iron Man as well, so here's my other hero, and it's the same sort of deal. So you basically just slide the card up and it will exhaust. You've got cool sort of elven picture in the background, fairly simplistic in terms of design, your draw deck and discard pile. Now if you run out of space, one thing I will say about this mat is you probably will inevitably run out of space. You've got other allies you can put on this side, and you've got a victory display here, which you can put stuff there. The threat counter goes up here specifically, and then if you have got any particular engaged enemies with you, then they can slide at the top of the mat like that, and then come off as normal. Obviously anything to do with the encounter deck, you would put somewhere else. Now this mat is a handy one for the exhaust thing. The only thing is, I feel that this one needs a bigger size. I don't think they do a bigger size mat than this, but I would probably advise that this one would be a good one to have in a bigger size. More so possibly than even Marvel Champions, because Marvel Champions you can have a fair amount of upgrades out. Okay, that's normal. Having 5+ allies out though, the specific decks are going to warrant that. But here, you can have a lot of stuff out. I mean, you already have a particular, one of those special setup cards that can have 4 heroes. Now granted, this mat doesn't work if I use that. Normally it's 3 heroes here. The only thing with this though is that it's very easy in Lord of the Rings LCG to have more than 4 allies. So you've got space for 4 allies, and then you've got to kind of just go out of play for a bit there. And then in terms of attachments, more than one attachment could be on a character. So you could have one attachment for this particular hero, but then this hero might suddenly have another 5 attachments on it, some of which exhaust, some of which didn't, and trying to sort of dictate where they're ready and exhausted is a little bit on the tricky side. You'd have to come up with a system to try and distinguish between them. Now, it's not to say that you can't use this mat at all, it's just that you are going to probably have to maybe use areas outside of the mat. So a bit over here, a bit over there, and a bit below the mat, shall we say. So it's not as foolproof as some other mats, but it does still do the job for maybe like most smaller decks, you know, like less of the niche scenarios. But I would like to see this blown up to a bigger size. So imagine that, you know, that Marvel Champion size I had that covered pretty much the entire screen, done with this. So you could have quite a few engaged enemies, you could have 3 heroes easily, you know, don't worry about the 4th hero because frankly that's such a niche scenario, but you could have room for multiple attachments and multiple allies. Now, the tricky thing with that though is that you could have quite a lot of each. How big would the mat need to be? So I will give credit that Lord of the Rings LCG is probably one of the hardest of the games that require a mat to actually design a mat for. It's certainly not the easiest one to go for. So, like I say, I like the mat. I still use it. I did have a previous mat that I used. Just grab it out a sec. This isn't from a specific supplier or anything. I literally just got the image on the internet and printed it off a site. I used this one at one point because it had just like gorgeous artwork. But this isn't a particularly functional mat. I mean, it literally has a space for an active location, quest deck, encounter discard, and that's it. Everything else is just a line. I mean, it's got, you know, willpower and threat bit, which is quite nice if you've got the token for it. But otherwise, it's just basically, right, well, your stuff goes here and their stuff goes there. It was meant to be like a 2-player mat. Mainly, I sort of went quest, you know, I put my stuff here, staging area there, and my allies here. So, I mean, it kind of worked, but it wasn't particularly functional. It was just basically, oh yeah, it's another mat. This one, and also that mat has the problem with the exhaust problem where I've got to go turn it sideways for every exhaust. This one at least allows me to just simply get the card and go like that. And I cannot stress enough how nice that system is. So it's a decent little mat. I do recommend it, but I do probably say that I would love to see this in a big size, like a big size. That's definitely the way I want it to go next. Now we'll take a look at Arkham Horror LCG. Now I've got a couple of mats here to show you, but the main differences are pretty much just cosmetic for the most part. There's several on the site and they got minor functional differences, but for the most part it's mainly the image and the size of like the various icon bits. But I'll just cover that one up a little bit more so you don't accidentally see bits of it. So here we go. So on this one I am actually going to use Arkham Horror LCG cards for this one because it's a bit more, shall we say, useful. So that would probably work a bit better. But again, you've basically got functional areas for the cards. Now this doesn't have the ready and exhausted stuff on there, which is a little bit of a shame, but then in all fairness, there's not a huge amount in Arkham Horror LCG that you specifically exhaust. You spend charges, but you don't necessarily exhaust the card, so it's not as necessarily for this. But here you require to put the investigator to the side, and I'm not entirely certain if you're supposed to put it like that or like that. I mean, I suppose it's down to your personal preference how you do it. You've got a slot for permanence here, so, you know, in this particular case I can put some arcane researches there. And then the rest of them are basically pictured for the slots that your character has. So hand slot, you know, ally thing, and it won't help if you've got upgrades in your deck that allow you to have more than one thing in a slot, but if the worst came to the worst, you could just cover up another space that you don't tend to use. Like for example, that's a tarot card slot. Not often do people use the tarot cards in their deck, so you could just use that as an extra ally. But let's go through a few things. So for starters, this is a it's a mystic deck, so spells are a good thing. So a couple of spells there would be easy enough to have. Going through, certainly I could have a necklace asset, so there's, you know, crystal pendulum right there. Go and find some more. Let's find some more. Come on, there's got to be more around here somewhere. That's not... I might have to pull out the other deck at this rate if I can't find anything. Oh no, here's an ally. Here we go. Twyla Catherine Price is a catchy after all. There you go. Hand slot, so the Cthulhian Stone. And there's not much. Oh no, we'll just say I've got 2 Cthulhian Stones. I know that's not legal in the actual play, but I don't really have much in this deck that requires a hand slot, funny enough, so that's about as good as you're going to get. And if I had a body armor thing, like the Robes of Endless Night or whatever it's called, I think, the new card, it could go in here. This could be a tarot card slot. But then if you're really worried and you've got like charisma, so you need more than one ally, then fine, just put an ally here. What difference is it going to make? Then you've got the draw deck, discard pile, easy enough. But then what you've got on the sides is victory display, if that's necessary, threats, so the encounter deck threats, and other assets if you do run out of room. So if you did want to use a second ally over here, you could, although, let's say, most of the time, you're restricted by your slots. So for the most part, you're pretty much using the slots on this mat. Maybe you've got some special ally or assets from the deck, like the encounter deck has thrown something in per the scenario, so you could put them here, but at least you've got room. And then up here you've got engaged enemies, so let's just like say a few of these cards are enemies, just for example. You know, they could be up here, in whatever sort of shape or form you need. Don't know if you can see that on there, probably not, but let's see, do I need to bring this down? Nah, but you say you can do what you like with the engaged enemies. They would basically be above the mat. As for the tokens, hearts, brains, clues, resources, you just place them there, put the tokens out, and it will store them there so you can at least keep track of them easily. Apart from that though, most of the mats that this game has are fairly similar. The only main way to distinguish them really is more the image and the sort of background of the card slots. Now this is my personal favourite because not only are the deck slots very like bright and in your face, so it's easy to tell them apart, but I like the gun. I like this sort of like 1920s revolver at the back with the compass there. I think that kind of suits the ethos of the game quite well. But of course, you could try a different design, where here, you don't so much have an image in the background really, it's more that you can more clearly see where your resources go, you got a couple of tentacles, and then you've got a similar card layout. But they've got lots of different ways that they design the mats. You kind of just pick and choose what image you like. This one does have a slight variation on the other one though, is that you've got engaged enemies at the top, victory and threats are now at the side, the investigator and other assets go below. So I guess it just depends on your table setup as well, what you want to use. But these ones are good. I mean, you don't have to exhaust a lot in this game. In fact, I'm not entirely certain if you have to exhaust anything in the Arkham Horror LCG, now that I come to think about it. But it's got what you need for the slots. It's just not going to cater for if you've got, you know, like extra assets, but then those extra assets are going to be as a result of upgrading your deck, and not everybody even buys those upgrades anyway. So for the most part, it should cater just fine. But yeah, I enjoy them. They're useful. It's just nice to have somewhere to put everything, so it's nice and neat rather than like say all over the shop. And particularly with regards to identifying what goes in what slot, it's a nice way of sort of just making certain that you don't accidentally catch yourself out by thought going, oh wait a minute, that's not a spell slot. Oh, I've already got 2 spells, right? Yeah, don't put any more spells out then. You know, it could at least just stop you accidentally making a mistake. Now we come on to a little darling of mine called Lord of the Rings Journeys in Middle-earth. These are very simplistic and very small mats. In fact, I think I was given 3 of them actually. Not that I've ever played this as a 3-person game. I think I've only ever controlled 2 heroes at once, although now I can control 3, I guess, so, you know, nothing wrong with that. But this is a fairly simple mat, so you don't tend to exhaust anything in this game either, so you've got essentially just deck slots. So I'll show this blank one here, but I'll put the cards on, actually I'll show this as blank, and then this one can be the one where I put stuff. So your hero can go there, so there's my Arwen. I'm playing through the expansion campaign at the moment, so I've got Arwen as one of my heroes. And then you've just got stuff for your skill deck, prepared skills, armor, trinkets, items with the icons to distinguish between the types of things. So let's say I've prepared Even Star. I've also got a Gathered Wisdom, let's say an Elven Light, and anything else pretty nice that I would normally prepare with this deck. Insight, pretty half decent skill. Your deck, let's try and separate a few things there. So armor and trinkets, so my armor being a cloak. Items, basically, I can say like there's my knife and there's my sling. Trinkets, I don't think I've got any trinkets with this particular deck yet. I'm only sort of a small way into here. But then you can have your skill deck here, along with your skill deck discard there. And that's essentially how the mat would work. I mean, it's just a nice way to keep your cards organized. Now, obviously, if you might think, well, hang on, what if I run out of slots? Well, in this game, you are not allowed to have more than 4 prepared skills. So these are my 4 prepared skills, so you should not have any reason why you should need more extra room. Granted, you might maybe find an extra weapon or extra trinket, but that's not likely. It's not something that's going to come up in every single game. But with multiple players, you could easily just have one player with this, and then if I wanted to, I could bring out my Eleanor deck, and Eleanor would be on here. Eleanor, skill deck, item, and that. And it certainly does keep it very nice and condensed. If there's any minor issue I do have with this is that as much as it's a very functional mat, it's not the best looker of the mats here, because by keeping it so condensed, and it kind of needs to be that way really, because if you don't keep it condensed, you're going to need a lot of table space, because bear in mind the map tends to take up a lot of room. But the image in the background is not the easiest to make out. In fact, really, I mean, you've got a light outline of the ring here. Most of this is kind of grey fog of war, and then, oh look, there's an orc, you know, mortal orc or Uruk-hai in the background there, swinging an axe. That's kind of it. You know, it would have been nice maybe to have put something a bit more bright and colourful in the sense of imagery, or maybe just make it a bit more clear cut, or maybe even just put some variations onto the imagery. But as I say, this one is going for a minimalistic style approach, trying to keep everything nice and neat and condensed, and for that, it does a decent job. Just like I say, I mean, I've got, what was I using before I used these? I still use it every now and again, and in fact, I actually put this mat on top of the other mat I've got. I've got the massive giant map of Middle-earth playmat, the one that's like about like a huge thing, takes up half your geeks and table. I do use that pretty much all the time with my Lord of the Rings games, but then I put these playmats on top of that for functionality, I'll say. It's just because I love that Middle-earth playmat so much, but there's no function to it, it's just really, really nice looking. So, you know, this is cool. If you've got players around the table, I could imagine that it wouldn't take up too much room to have several people with, you know, the mats at different ends facing around. You could easily see what's on other people's mats. Pretty decent, just does the job. Functionality, very nice. Okay, now we've got a mat used for Mansions of Madness 2nd Edition. I can't recall if there's multiple images available for this one. I think this might be the only one, but it's still a pretty nice one. I mean, you have a literal mansion on the back with a nice sort of black and white kind of almost noir setting. You've got the sort of hint of some tentacles because it is Cthulhu after all. And of course, the mystical compass of everything's going to go nasty. Oh, and typical 1920s car. So it certainly does fit the theme. But this one isn't so much about the imagery, even though I do quite like the way the mansion and the car have turned out. That's pretty sweet. This one's more about keeping things condensed and functional, so your investigator can go here. Miss Ursula shall be my guinea pig for this one because I've recently used her in a solo game I was doing. But then, let's see if I can get some cards out and just show. So essentially, there's not much in the way of artwork on these except for the horror face up and damage, you know, face down, for example, which is quite handy actually, because you do end up with a lot of damage and horror flowing through this game, and it's nice to be able to sort of go, oh yeah, I just need to get some face up, some face down, keep track of it, and it can go a little bit insane if you're not careful. So for example, you know, back spasm suddenly ends up being a face up for whatever reason. Like I say, I'm not going by the rules on the card. I know some of them say flip back down. I'm just showing you for, you know, illustrative purposes. So you can easily keep track of damage that way. And then everything else is just literally for the slot. So what do you want? I've got a spell here. So Call the Storm. Let's get some more. Thing is, I've got to pull out a lot of decks from my giant box here. It's a bit of a mission, I will have to say, because, you know, just to show you for this. But let's get some more equipment. So these are common items. So disc of it's Samna or whatever it is, some anti-venom, an expedition lock, and some hedge shears. You never know when you might need to trim a hedge. And then let's say I've been poisoned 1,000,000 times, so there's my 2 poisoned abilities. And even though I don't have any unique items to show off right now, let's just assume that these are lucky, you know, unique items. I'm just trying to show for illustration here. But yeah, it's basically just a functional mat again. So the cards go on them. You don't really have to exhaust anything in this game either. So it's just a storage thing, just to say, right, here's my uniques, here's my commons, a spell, elixir, a couple of conditions, although maybe we'll have liked more conditions. That's the thing, because this is kind of the only flaw I do have. You know, you can't make the map too big, I admit, but then elixir, occasionally use them, but not always. Conditions can vary, although it is possible to have more than 2 conditions on you. I would have liked maybe just for maybe more spell slots, because you easily can have more than 1 spell, particularly if you are a character with good lore who is basically trying to hunt down spells like crazy. I would have probably said more of these slots were needed and maybe less of the unique item slot, but then, you've got to fit them on, and otherwise you're going to have slot, 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 and it's just going to be a whole mat full of slots, and you'll miss out on some of the cool artwork. But it keeps it relatively condensed, although you do have this space up here which isn't really doing a lot. But then you could argue you could put things like your clue tokens and your damage and that. You could put your markers and tokens on this area to keep it at least on your playmat, and then all you got to do is just like pull the mat out and do your thing. Although of course cards will slide. So this does fine. The only issue I have is that I have to do a particularly big table solo play if I'm using this, because I do not play this game with just 2 investigators, because you really need at least 3 for the game to be relatively balanced. So thankfully, I do at least use 3 or 4 investigators, although I only have 2 of these mats. So it's kind of a little bit on the impractical side for me just currently, because trying to play this game with only 2 players is tricky at its best. But if you've got a few of these mats, then certainly, it's good to get 1 for each player. And even if it's just you at the table, at least you've got a nice way of organizing your cards, even if everyone else doesn't. So that's Mansions of Madness 2nd edition. Okay, now we got 7 Wonders Duel. So each of you could have one of these mats. It's got a very nice, bright, colourful picture of the Centurion soldier here with some backdrop of cityscape. The pyramids of Gize are there, and it's just a nice looking mat overall, but mainly this also allows you to be a bit more, shall we say, condensed with your tableau. So let's get a bunch of cards out and showcase how this one works. So you've got 4 wonders up here. So you can basically have, here we go, so the Appian Way, Sagrada Familia. I think that's meant to replace another wonder, I forget which one, but... And you could even, in a sense, you're playing a solo game, you haven't got anywhere on the map to store those, but you don't desperately need it. But let's get a bunch of the cards out. So a bunch of level 1 cards here. And you've got room on your playmat to basically slide this underneath and say, I've built the pyramids. So, you've got some spare room there. But failing that, you're essentially grouping them into colors. So here's my green, sorry, my blue, I'm colorblind here. And then you just build up, down. Build up, down. God, I'm going mixed up here. But yeah, here we go. So let's say, got some reds there. Got some browns here. Got grey. And then there's one colour I believe I'm missing. Yes, I need from the level 3 deck an example for this. Here we go. We're obviously going to need some... Nope, where are they? Where have they gone? Trying to get them out of my insert at the moment. They're a little bit, shall we say, absent. Here we go. Guild. So as you get more and more cards, you can just sort of build up the column down there, and you've even got a space to the side for divinity. So if you've got the expansion to this one, then you can essentially have these like divinity tokens that you need to use, and you might even have some of the science tokens from the base game that you use. You could always pop them there as a nice little storage area. But yeah, that's only if you've got the expansion. If you haven't, then you don't need to worry too much. But at least you've got somewhere to store them. I'm not sure it needs to be quite so big a slot, but it's not necessarily a bad thing that it's there. And let's just get... But then if you are using the expansion, then it's big enough to fit your actual divinity card. So you've got multiple uses that you could use for the slot, but the divinity is probably like the main reason you're going to use it. But yeah, everything just condenses quite nicely. So imagine that these 4 wonders have got a card underneath for actually doing it, and then you've got very nice, neat columns going all the way down to basically show what colors you've got, what markers you've got for building chains, what science symbols you've got. Nice and simple. Yeah, you might overflow the map, but that's only if you've bought so much of a particular color. And frankly, if you have done that, chances are you've already won the game, because if you've done that with red and green, that's probably what would happen. But you can always slide them up a bit. I mean, you can create the column as much as you like, but let's just take an example and go as far as I can down the mat. Let's just assume I'm building one single column here. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Right, so I can do a column of 7 cards showing the banner in full before it gets to the bottom of the mat. Then you might start overflowing. But 7 is a pretty decent amount for a particular color. Chances are you've won the game if you've got 7 military and 7 science, but I suppose that comes down to what game you're playing and how it's sort of panning out. But yeah, this is just a nice, colourful mat that just keeps everything in one place, keeps all the cards where they need to be, caters for an expansion, which is nice to see that it does. You know, I was afraid that it was going to sort of like just clearly leave that bit out, but I think this is quite a recent mat to the roster on their site, and yeah, it just keeps everything nice and neat, because you can have columns, all, you know, cards all over the shop with some people's setups. The Seven Wonders Duel, this basically allows me to go, nope, everything's here. It does quite well when I need to do a solo game. In fact, because it's a solo game, I can't use the expansion. I would like the solo mode to be able to cater for that at some point, but then I could always stick the adversary down there. Okay, it leaves a little bit to be decided at the bottom, but at least I have Cleopatra there, and then if I want to, if I have the print and play cards that I can get out, I couldn't really put them here because of this, but then what I could do is put them underneath. So here's my decision deck for Cleopatra. So I could just simply use the right hand side of the mat to host the print and play element for the solo mode. And if you haven't tried it, by the way, check out my solo video on that. It's a good fun mode. And Cleopatra beat me up last time. Wasn't very nice. It's a pretty tricky mode, I'll have to say. But yeah, I like this one. This is a pretty solid mat if you're a fan of the game. Just don't expect to be keeping this in the box. Now I'm saving the best for last. And when I say the best, I'm not necessarily talking the best in functionality. I'm talking the best like overall, all things considered. But functionality wise, it's difficult to beat the large Marvel's Champion mat. You know, that is just a really solid play mat. This one is still pretty solid though in the functionality department. But in terms of artwork, wow. The wingspan mats that is on this site are beautiful. This is my personal favorite. It has the like soaring eagle flying over the lake. It looks like an image from somewhere I could be standing. Like it looks, you know, whatever photo created this, you know, the photographer deserves credit. It is so good. Now, that's assuming it's a photo. If it's computer generated, then well, credit to whoever did it. I mean, I'm not an expert on this kind of thing, but there are 2 mats for this. So, well, when I say 2, I mean 2 functional mats. There's several different designs that you can get with different birds, and there was another one, I think, with a kingfisher that I was tempted by, or was it the swan? I can't remember, but this was my favorite. There's a few other bird designs. You can literally just pick and choose which design you like. However, you'll be pleased to know that with the upcoming Oceania expansion, which I'm sorry to say I don't own yet, because I'm not lucky enough to have review copies of that sort of thing, then you have a mat that will work with the new one. So this has got a lot of weird birds all over it. Nice setting as well, looks more like the Outback, but here it's got the various elements that are going to come into play with the expansion. I do not know enough about the expansion to comment on how good this map will be with it, but it's got quite a lot of iconography on it, so I'm pretty certain that it's going to cover all the bases, but I'm not going to be reviewing this one per se. I just wanted to show you guys that if you were afraid, oh, this mat's going to be redundant with the expansion, there is a mat available for you, so you know, Jacob has thought that and taken it into account. So let's bring back the normal wingspan mat for those who maybe don't want the expansion. So here you've got pretty much an identical replica of the board itself. So you've got the actions laid out in terms of what they do. You've got the dice that are used, although I think the dice imagery on here is actually a lot more interesting than the other one. I wonder if I can get a board out of the box and see if I can compare the two. So, whoop, get it out. Let's find a board. So that is a board. So yeah, this is like a more sort of realistic approach to the die itself. And these look good, but as much as I like this whole kind of like, you know, nice pastel colored representation of, you know, the forest, the plains and the water and that, and these are beautiful mats. I'm sorry, but which one would you rather play on? This like wins hands down. And it has all the iconography that you need. So if we bring this back, dice, eggs, what you can convert, the powers, that. In fact, size comparison, the playmat is actually a little bit bigger. But so it's got more room to kind of make this larger text and larger imagery so that you can see it fairly clearly, despite the fact you do have a very beautiful, if slightly distracting image in the background. In terms of the cards, let's get a bunch of birds out and just see how they will do. So, Franklin's gull. I'm going to try and stay realistic for this. So, blues, that's gulls. I don't know why the gulls getting mixed up. I just wanted birds. I literally wanted birds, and I pulled out the gulls. How unlucky was that? So yellow. Let's get some greens in here as well. Yellow. I do like going for the yellow a lot in this game. So, There we go. Let's say we got a bunch of birds here. These are sleeved, sleeve kings. This is what I use religiously to sleeve my games now. But as you can see, despite the fact that the mat is bigger, it's still the right size for the cards. So this slot here, you may not be able to see it necessarily on camera, but you've got the outline slot. There we go. The card fits effortlessly in it. Now, granted, the sleeves I use I think are a little bit big on the top, so maybe I need to... I can't recall if this was the size that you had to get for the sleeve, or maybe I just deliberately used slightly bigger sleeves because that was all I had. But if I was to not have a sleeve, there you go. That is right within the lines. That is pretty much bang on measurement-wise, but even with the sleeve, works just fine. You know, it doesn't interfere too much with the card above it. I'm still pretty good with what I've got. Can read this pretty well. It's even bigger text. Like I say, your only gripe with this mat is really going to be the slightly extra space, although it's not that much of an extra space compared to the board. Let's be perfectly honest. What are we talking? About a centimetre on this side, and maybe like an inch above. That's pretty much the size difference, but I just think that image is so good. I mean, okay, you're covering up with birds, but then you get to look at all the pretty birds, but then when you're done with the game, beautiful looking mat. So yeah, this is a given. If I'm playing Wingspan solo, or if we're playing it at my house, I'm pulling this mat out and I'm using it. You know, it's like not going to be a problem for that front. And it might even allow me to put one of my boards in... No, I won't be able to put my boards in storage because I've only got one of these mats. I'd have to get 4 of these mats to cater for no one ever needing a board again. Why 4? Because I refuse to play this game with 5. But... and even then, 4 is probably a bit much. But yep, do love this mat. If I'm playing solo, but against your Tom there, this is a given and I'm bringing it out. So, you know, try out the other designs, pick the birds you like. I was really torn between 3 different designs in particular that I just thought were absolutely gorgeous. And the eagle is probably my favorite bird out of what was on offer. So it got the, the first prize to come into my collection. And yeah, that's basically all the mats that I've got from Jacob Ziemba at Lizard Den Store. LizardDenStore.com. There'll be a link in the description. You can check out the site and see if there's anything there for you. Failing that, he's an active user on the Facebook groups, particularly the Board Game Trading Game in UK group, the Board Game group. Maybe I've seen him turn up on the Dice Tower group that I'm on as well. And certainly I'm pretty certain he's on the Solo Board Gamers group as well, because absolutely, as a solo gamer myself, a lot of the time, Playmats are a great thing for me to use because I'm the only one who needs the mat. But yeah, there's some good stuff on there. He's a friendly bloke. The mats are good quality, neoprene style mats. They look the business. They have good functionality. Could you get better mats if you tried to design it yourself? Possibly, but then you're going to have to design it yourself. You know, other play mats are available from other places, and you know, it really is just a case of pick one that you think is going to be suitable for your needs. You know, I think it's one of the things about play mats is that it's not as easy to make as you might think. You sort of think, well, hang on, this should be miles bigger and there should be slots for everything, but you've got to think about the realistic size of the mat and then think about all the game pieces and how much room it's going to take on the table. You know, your play mat would have to be ridiculously huge to cater for some games out there. I already mentioned the limitations that a play mat will have with something like, say, the Lord of the Rings LCG. But there's other games on the site besides the ones I've shown you. There's Runebound, there's Zaon's End, I believe. There's several other games on there that I just don't play, hence I haven't looked at the mats themselves. But yeah, quite a bunch of them. So, look at all this stuff, look at all this stuff. Tons of mats. Absolutely tons of mats here. Ridiculous amount of neoprene stuff. I almost need clothes hangers for this. It's kind of ridiculous. So, yeah, that's it for this Accessorize video. I hope you enjoyed what you see. If you like what you see, please consider subscribing to the channel, but more importantly, consider visiting the Lizard Den store and just giving them a look and see for yourself. So that's it for me. I'll see you on the next Broken Meeple video. And remember, regardless of the map you're using, it's still only a game. So, you know, make certain you think about your wallet while you're also purchasing a lot of these funky looking mats. Take care and see you next time.